Let me ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with yourself. When was the last time your son called you? Not because his wife reminded him, not because it was your birthday or a holiday, but simply because he wanted to hear your voice, because he missed you, because he remembered that you are his mother, the woman who raised him, who held his hand when the world was too big and too scary. If you had to pause just now, if you had to think hard to remember, then this video was made for you. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I've spent over 40 years sitting across from families in pain. Mothers who cry in my office not because their son died, but because he's alive, he's healthy, he's just 20 minutes away, and yet he feels like a stranger. And in most of those cases, there's a pattern. A quiet, almost invisible pattern that pulled him away. Now let me be very clear before we go any further. This is not a video about hating your daughter-in-law. This is not about blaming all the women who married our sons. Most daughters-in-law are wonderful, loving, and kind. But some, and I have seen this more times than I can count, some exhibit specific behaviors that slowly, methodically, almost surgically separate a son from his mother. Today, I'm going to walk you through 7 types. 7 patterns. Not to make you angry. Not to start a war. But to help you see what you might be dealing with, so you can finally stop blaming yourself for something that was never your fault. If this resonates with you, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on the notification bell. Because every single week, this channel gives you the truth no one else will say out loud. This is strong elderly life, and we don't sugarcoat anything here. Now, let's begin. Here is something that breaks my heart. I've had women in their 70s and 80s sit in front of me and say, "I don't know what I did wrong." They replay every conversation, every holiday dinner, every word they said, wondering if maybe they overstepped, maybe they were too much, maybe they deserve this silence. And I have to look them in the eye and say, "No, you didn't do anything wrong. You are caught in a dynamic that is much bigger than one bad conversation or one awkward Thanksgiving." The truth is this: when a son gets married, a new power structure forms. And in healthy families, everyone adjusts. The mother steps back a little. The wife steps in. And the son learns to love both women without betraying either one. That is the healthy version. But in unhealthy dynamics, something else happens. A concept that psychologists call triangulation. This is when a third person, in this case, sometimes the daughter-in-law, controls the flow of information and emotion between two people. She becomes the filter. Everything your son hears about you goes through her. Everything you hear about your son goes through her. And slowly, without anyone noticing, she becomes the center of a web that she built, thread by thread. This is not always intentional. Sometimes it comes from her own insecurity. Sometimes from her own painful childhood. But regardless of the reason, the result is the same. You lose your son. Not in a dramatic explosion. In a slow, quiet fade. So let me walk you through the 7 patterns I've seen destroy the mother-son bond. Slowly, quietly, and almost invisibly. This is the most common pattern I see. The gatekeeper is the woman who positions herself as the only door between you and your son. Here's how you recognize her. You call your son's phone and she answers. You text your son and she replies. You try to make plans with him and she says, "Let me check our schedule and get back to you." Except she never gets back to you. Or she does, 3 weeks later, when it's too late. Your son doesn't even realize what's happening. He genuinely believes he's staying in touch because she occasionally says, "Oh, I talked to your mom the other day." He thinks the connection is being maintained. It's not. She is maintaining her control over it. The psychological mechanism here is simple and powerful. Whoever controls the flow of information controls the relationship. This is true in politics. It's true in business. And it is devastatingly true in families. I counseled a woman named Margaret, 74 years old, sharp as a tack. She told me she hadn't had a private conversation with her son in 3 years. Every call was on speakerphone. Every visit, his wife was right there. Every text got a reply from his wife's phone saying, "He's busy right now." Margaret thought her son didn't want to talk to her. But when I finally spoke to the son, he was shocked. He had no idea his mother felt cut off. His wife had told him, "Your mom and I talk all the time, she's fine." That is the gatekeeper. She doesn't slam the door in your face. She just makes sure you can never walk through it without her permission. If the gatekeeper controls access, the scorekeeper controls the narrative. This is the daughter-in-law who remembers everything. Every offhand comment you made. Every time you offered unsolicited advice. Every moment she interpreted as criticism, disrespect, or overstepping. She wrote it down in her mental ledger. And that ledger only has one column: evidence against you. You know you're dealing with a scorekeeper when your son suddenly brings up something you said 4 years ago at a family dinner. Something you don't even remember saying. But she remembers. And she's been replaying it to him, building a case, constructing a version of you that is critical, overbearing, and impossible to please. The psychology behind this is what we call weaponized confirmation bias. We all have confirmation bias. We tend to notice things that confirm what we already believe. But the scorekeeper takes this to another level. She has already decided that you are a problem. And from that moment on, everything you do becomes more evidence. You offer to help with the baby. Controlling. You don't offer to help. Cold and uncaring. You bring a gift. Overstepping. You don't bring a gift. Neglectful. You cannot win this game. Because the game was rigged before you sat down at the table. The most painful part? Your son starts to see you through her scorecard. He doesn't even realize he's reading from someone else's notes. This one is subtle and extremely effective. The victim is the daughter-in-law who cries. Not in front of you, in front of your son. After every interaction with you, she collapses into tears. She says she feels attacked, judged, unwelcome, unsafe. Your son, who loves his wife and wants to protect her, is now put in an impossible position. He feels he must choose. And because he sleeps next to her every night and sees her tears every week, he chooses her. Not because he doesn't love you, but because the pain in front of him feels more urgent than the pain 20 miles away. Here's what you need to understand. Emotional manipulation through victimhood is one of the most powerful psychological tools that exists. It is nearly impossible to argue against someone's tears. You cannot fact-check feelings. And any attempt to defend yourself sounds heartless next to a crying woman saying, "She makes me feel so small." I worked with a family where the mother-in-law was the kindest, most soft-spoken woman I have ever met. She brought meals. She babysat without being asked. She never once criticized her daughter-in-law. But the daughter-in-law told her husband, with genuine tears, that his mother's energy made her anxious, that she needed space to heal. That was 6 years ago. That grandmother has seen her grandchildren exactly twice since then. The victim doesn't need you to actually do something wrong. She only needs to feel wronged. And no one questions the person who's crying. Some daughters-in-law don't want to exclude you. They want to beat you. The competitor turns your family into a contest. Who makes the better Thanksgiving turkey? Whose house the grandchildren prefer? Who your son asks for advice? Whose traditions the family follows at Christmas? You know her by the tension you feel every time you're in the same room. Nothing is relaxed. Nothing is easy. If you share a memory from your son's childhood, she changes the subject. If your grandchild says, "Grandma makes the best cookies," she spends the next weekend baking 4 different kinds. This pattern comes from deep insecurity. The competitor feels threatened by your history with your son. You had him for 20 or 25 years before she came along. You know things about him she will never know. You shaped the man she married. And somewhere inside her, that terrifies her. So she competes. Not to win you over, but to replace you. The tragedy here is that your son gets exhausted by the tension. He doesn't understand why every family event feels like a battlefield. So he starts avoiding. He skips your birthday dinner. He shortens holiday visits. He stops bringing the grandchildren over. Not because he doesn't care, but because he's tired of being caught in a war he never asked to fight. And you? You lose not because she won, but because the competition made everyone want to leave the room. Now, this one is going to be controversial, and I need to say something important before I explain this type. Boundaries are real. They are healthy. They are necessary. Every family needs them. But there is a difference between healthy boundaries and weaponized boundaries. The boundary builder uses the language of therapy. Boundaries, toxic, my mental health, I need to protect my peace, not to create healthy space, but to construct a wall between you and your son. And because she uses the right vocabulary, no one questions her. She sets rules that seem reasonable on the surface but are designed to limit your access. You must call 48 hours before visiting. You cannot bring food unless she approves the menu. You cannot discuss certain topics. You cannot give gifts to the grandchildren without her permission. You cannot share photos on social media. And if you accidentally break any of these rules, even once, you are labeled disrespectful of boundaries and punished with weeks of silence. Here's the key. Healthy boundaries are flexible, kind, and applied to everyone equally. Weaponized boundaries are rigid, punitive, and applied primarily to you. I've seen this pattern increase dramatically in the last 10 years. The language of mental health has entered mainstream culture, which is wonderful. But like any tool, it can be misused. And when a daughter-in-law uses therapy language as a sword instead of a shield, it is almost impossible to defend against. Because how do you argue with someone who says, "I'm just protecting my family's mental health"? You can't. And she knows that. This is the one that keeps me up at night. Because this type leaves no fingerprints. The silent eraser doesn't fight with you. She doesn't set dramatic boundaries. She doesn't cry or compete or keep score. She simply, quietly, methodically, removes you from the picture. You're not invited to the school play. Not because she said you can't come, she just forgot to mention it. The family vacation photos are posted online, and you're not in any of them, because somehow you weren't there. The grandchildren's birthday party guest list was so long that they had to keep it small, but her parents were there. She doesn't erase you in big, obvious ways. She erases you in 1,000 tiny ones. Your picture comes down from the hallway. Your recipes stop being made. Your name stops being mentioned in family conversations. And your son doesn't notice, because that's the entire point. She isn't removing you with an announcement. She's removing you with silence. This is what psychologists call passive exclusion. And it is the most dangerous pattern on this list. Because when your son finally notices, if he notices at all, there's no single event to point to. No big fight. No dramatic scene. Just a slow, creeping emptiness where you used to be. I counseled a woman who realized one Christmas that her grandchildren didn't recognize her voice on the phone. She hadn't seen them in 8 months. Not because there was conflict, but because every attempt to visit had been quietly redirected. "Oh, the kids are sick this weekend. We already have plans. Maybe next month." Next month never came. The silent eraser doesn't need to hate you. She just needs to make sure everyone forgets you exist. This is the final type, and in many ways, the most devastating. The reprogrammer doesn't just separate you from your son in the present. She rewrites the past. She changes how your son remembers his own childhood, his own family, his own mother. It starts with questions. Did your mom always criticize people like that? Was your family always this dysfunctional? Don't you think it's weird how your mom always needed to be the center of attention? These aren't questions. They're seeds. And planted often enough, over months and years, they grow into a completely new version of your son's history. Your son starts to reinterpret his childhood through a negative filter. The strict rules you had, now he calls them controlling. The sacrifices you made, now he sees them as guilt trips. The love you showed, now he questions whether it was conditional. He's not making these judgments on his own. He's reading a script that was written for him, line by line, over hundreds of conversations he doesn't even remember having. This is a form of long-term gaslighting, not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but the slow domestic kind that rewrites someone's reality, one conversation at a time. I worked with a son in his 40s who came to see me because his wife suggested he process his childhood trauma. When I asked him about his childhood, he described a cold, critical, emotionally absent mother. When I met his mother, she was warm, loving, and heartbroken. She showed me photos, letters, school records showing her at every event, every game, every concert. The son stared at those photos like he was seeing someone else's life. He hadn't been separated from his mother. He had been reprogrammed to forget her. Now I know what you're feeling. You might be recognizing one of these types, maybe even 2 or 3. And the instinct is to fight, to confront your daughter-in-law, to sit your son down and give him a list of everything she's done. Don't. I've been doing this for 40 years, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, direct confrontation almost never works. Your son will feel attacked. He will defend his wife, and you will be cast as the villain in a story that was already being written against you. Instead, here is what I want you to do. First, maintain a direct, low-pressure connection with your son. Send short texts. Share a funny memory. Ask about his day. Don't complain about his wife. Don't make him choose. Just be a warm, steady presence in his life that exists independently of her. A light he can always find when he's ready. Second, be ruthlessly honest with yourself. I know this is hard, but ask yourself, is there any truth in the conflict? Did you overstep? Were you critical? Have you made his wife feel unwelcome, even unintentionally? Sometimes the hardest part of healing is admitting that we, too, have made mistakes. This doesn't make what she's doing okay, but it makes you stronger, wiser, and harder to dismiss. Third, document your reality. I don't mean hire a detective. I mean keep a private journal. Write down what happens, when it happens, and how it makes you feel. Because when you're dealing with gaslighting or silent exclusion, the first thing you lose is your trust in your own memory. The journal keeps you anchored to the truth. Fourth, find your people. Whether it's a support group, a counselor, a church community, or a channel like this one, you need people who understand. People who won't say, "Oh, just give her time," or "That's just how young people are." You need people who see what you see and tell you that you're not imagining it. And fifth, never, ever give up on your son. He may be distant right now. He may be repeating words that aren't his. He may look at you like he doesn't know you anymore. But somewhere inside him, buried under all the manipulation, all the rewritten memories, all the weaponized boundaries, there is a boy who loves his mother. And that boy is waiting for a chance to come back. I started this video with a question. When was the last time your son called you just to hear your voice? Maybe it's been weeks, maybe months, maybe years. And maybe you've told yourself it's because he's busy, or because that's just how life works when kids grow up. But I want you to hear me, really hear me, when I say this. You are not losing your mind. You are not being dramatic. You are not an overbearing mother who needs to let go. You are a woman who loves her son, who gave him everything, and who deserves to be seen, honored, and remembered. If this video touched something real inside you, I want you to do 2 things. First, share it. Not for me, not for this channel, but because somewhere out there, right now, there is another mother sitting alone in her living room, staring at a phone that never rings, wondering what she did wrong. She needs to know she's not alone. Send her this video. Second, subscribe to Strong Elderly Life. Because every week we talk about the things that no one else has the courage to say. We don't pretend aging is easy. We don't tell you to just smile and accept it. We tell you the truth. And we stand beside you. Next week, I'm going to talk about something just as important. 5 things you should never say to your son about his wife and what to say instead. Trust me, you don't want to miss that one. Until then, stay strong, stay wise, and never forget who you are. You are his mother. And nothing can ever erase that.